the big ideas in their lives and the events that have helped shape them. We're recording this one in Portcullis House, where MPs have their offices, because my guest today is Mhairi Black from the SNP. Now, you'll remember she was elected aged 20, still a student at Glasgow University back in 2015, and, you know, the world's media went mad. But then she went a little bit quiet, and now she has been an MP for over 4 years. She's about to celebrate her 25th birthday, and is still trying to change the world, I guess.
A wee bit.
Where did it come from? When did you first decide you wanted to change the world?
Oh, probably from about the age of 3, if I'm honest. I've always just kind of had a sense of that's wrong, that shouldn't be happening like that. So how do we fix it?
Just naturally?
Just
from your
it's
parents
all
or family?
All I can remember. I think if I'm honest, it must have came from my family. Just in terms of they always brought us up to believe in doing your best, but also being as understanding as you can, and appreciating that everybody has something going on in their life that you might not know about. So you need to be gentle with people and try and help them as best you can, rather than just blaming people all the time or looking at things on the surface because it's easy. So we were always really challenged. I do remember that growing up. We weren't allowed just to have opinions. It was, right, but why do you think that?
And do you think you were therefore always headed for politics?
No, not necessarily. Because ultimately, it still sounds as cheesy as it did when I was 6 when I said it. I was asked at school, you know, what would you want to be when you grow up? And I remember trying to think, and I'd hit out with everything. I want to be a judge, I want to be a farmer, I want to be an astronaut, you know, it would change every week. But when I really sat down and thought about it, I remember saying, I just want to help people. And like that, people in my class would laugh at me and stuff, but I really meant it. I'm going, I don't know how else to word that.
Do you feel you're doing that?
At this moment in time, yeah, as best I can, but...
as a constituency MP,
yes,
primarily?
But that's the only way of doing it, you know, through surgeries and actually getting individual cases and being able to argue them out. That's the bit where I feel, you know, we are making an impact here. But to be honest, when I'm in Westminster, not so much. This is the bit that...
You still don't like it?
Me. Oh, God, no. What's that like? I mean, there's mice running about the place. Bits of the building are falling off while you're at your work. There's horrible, horrible people floating about, and you're in your work till 10 o'clock at night when you've came in at 8 o'clock in the morning and you've no idea when you're going home that week. Or
are there horrible, horrible people floating about?
Oh, aye, definitely. Or there's folks that I think, my God, I don't know how somebody's not evaluated you yet. There's something seriously dark behind your thinking. So, aye, there's definitely some dark characters in here.
I mean, you know, without naming names if you don't want to. I mean, give me an example. What do you mean?
Well, I mean...
Or name names if you want to.
I know, that's what I'm debating in my head. See, all it takes is one night to go out on the terrace where you see folk with a drink in them, and that's when you get real personalities starting to come out, where people are letting the mask slip, so to speak, and whether it be behaving inappropriately with people, whether it be being absolutely pig ignorant to the staff in the house, demanding whatever it is, you can start to see the examples. You go, you're just a horrible, horrible individual. The sense of entitlement, the sense of I'm untouchable and this is my turf and I'm in charge here. It's inescapable at some points.
And is that across parties? Or?
Yes, across parties. Yeah.
So were your politics always SNP?
Yes, my politics have always been in line with the SNP, certainly. But
not party tribal?
It. Yeah, because I, like most other folk in the west of Scotland, were brought up with a stalwart Labour family. And then my dad, I think he was the first one to move to the SNP. And my mum followed suit eventually. My mum always supported independence, but she'd still voted Labour. So then by the time that I was kind of getting old enough to really start thinking about these things, I was more just interested in why suddenly so many folk who have constantly argued that Labour were the the saving grace of humanity, now absolutely despise them. And that was really interesting for me.
So what is the root of your nationalism? Is it that independence is the best way to solve the problems of the people you live with? Or is it the principle of independence?
No, for me it's nothing to do with the emotion of it. Because I actually get really uncomfortable because people call us the nationalists. And I'm like, there's nothing national about me. It's pragmatic. I think two things. What is the point in voting if your vote doesn't make a bit of difference? And it should be that if you think a government isn't serving you and your community correctly, you can boot them out of the next election. So Scotland's tried to do that for the last 30 years, but it doesn't matter because Scotland only makes up that much of the UK. So for me, I just think, well, we don't live in a true democracy then. Realistically, we're actually just subject to whatever England votes for in most cases. And I still point this out to folk today, that Scotland has 59 MPs, the City of London has 73. So you've got one city that can outvote and does outvote the second largest nation in this, family of equals. How does that work? How does that square up?
I suppose there are more people.
Yeah, there are more people
in London.
Yeah, totally. But if you go by the arguments that the UK government gives us and that British nationalists and unionist politicians give us, it is that no, we're the most successful union of nations. So how does that work if it ultimately just comes down to the number of people? Because you can see that disparity over generations. And fundamentally, certainly for all my life, the Scottish Parliament has only ever been used to find ways to protect ourselves from policies that Westminster is imposing on us that we didn't vote for in the first place.
But is the SNP really left-wing enough for you now in Scotland? I mean, you're a Westminster MP, not a Scottish politician, but if you look at the way the SNP runs Scotland,
yep.
Is it socialist enough for you?
I would go further, aye. And that's how I've always said that the day after we achieve independence, my vote's up for grabs. Because then politics becomes the way it should be in Scotland, where it's, I need to fight for your vote, and I need to convince you that I'm the best person to support here, rather than it being picking the best out of a bad bunch, so to speak. And because I believe that if we were independent, the electorate could actually get rid of governments, it could get rid of the SNP easily, then people start to believe in democracy again, and it starts to function, because it doesn't function if people don't see what they've voted being replicated.
So it is primarily about making your vote count for you. That's the first argument.
That's the real first basic one.
In terms of solving people's problems?
Well, that's where, because fundamentally I believe in democracy, but I also believe that in order to actually transform society in the way I think it should be transformed, we're never going to get that as part of Westminster. And Westminster still holds ultimate control for the vast majority of things, and especially when you're talking about welfare and such like, and even foreign affairs and defence policy and things. It's lunacy to have somebody else be in charge of that. And if we can bring that into control in Scotland and have governments that are actually accountable to Scotland and can be got rid of after one term if they don't do what they say they do, I think then we can start actually transforming the lives of people.
How do you want to transform society?
I want to transform it in the sense that our resources are used in particular for early intervention. Because you think of most of the problems that society deals with, whether it's drug abuse, mental health abuse, physical abuse, all of these things can be tied back more often than not to the experiences that an individual's had growing up. So as a broad example, we're down here, we're constantly arguing about something as simple as unemployment benefit. You still get people going, they're just lazy gits, that's it. So if you need to get off your backside and find a job, well, I think, no, if you get the vast majority of people, it's because they've fallen in hard times that they didn't expect. And even if you do get the few, and it's very few individuals who don't try to get a job and will just claim benefits, what has to have happened in your life where that is as satisfied as you are with your life? You know, that you actually don't want to do anything. What's happened to you to make you such a recluse that's made you not interested in participating in anything? That's what I kind of want to figure out. And I think part of that is early intervention. And if you can figure out, you know, what is it that actually gives people a good quality of life, everything else should be built from there.
But what would that mean, sort of, you know, smashing the structure of society and starting again for everybody? I mean...
Well, the big one for me is the economy. You have to transform how our economy works at this moment in time, because it's very capitalist, it's very cutthroat, and what's the point in having a system that is cutthroat to individuals rather than supportive of individuals? So that's where you look at some of the, again, it's I find interesting things like the citizens' income, stuff like that. I think they might be onto something. It's not perfect, but...
What, giving everybody a universal income?
So, but the principle that's driving that, if that makes sense, that's just one option of people who've decided, do you know what, I think that the world should be radically different, and I think the vast majority of people are just trying to get on with things. What will happen if we just give people money? Just see what happens. And what we're seeing is that more often than not, all the sort of small pocket examples of it, it's shown that, no, there is something in it, that a lot of people are managing to bring themselves up over the poverty line, and they're able to start, you know, functioning basically in the world, which is, I find interesting. So that's like one example of how you can do it.
Do you think people would be any less cutthroat? I mean, you know, if you gave them a base level of income, wouldn't there always be a competition to have more?
Yes, undoubtedly. But that's also shaped by how we've been, that's how we think, because that's how our entire world functions. What I'm interested in is picking that apart and going, right, well, let's try these little different ideas. So, and that's just one example. Like I say, it's not perfect by any manner of means, but it's something that's outside the box.
But fundamentally, you want to redistribute wealth.
Oh, definitely, yeah. I believe that, you know, the fundamentals of life, basically, so your water, your electricity, things like that, for me should be publicly owned, no doubt about it. It should never be that someone is able to make profits off of something that's essential.
And how do you answer that basic criticism that, you know, who wants to create wealth when you're not allowed to get rich?
Yeah. Well, that's what I think. And I sound hippy-dippy, but why can't everybody be rich? And it depends on define what rich is, because if rich is just having, you know, billions of pounds, I would still rather be me than be, you know, Jeffrey Epstein. He had billions of pounds, but he's not had a very happy time of it, has he? So I think going purely by money isn't good enough. I want to build something that's rich in terms of a society, a community, of a network of people.
I mean, in terms of the sort of, you know, your whole argument around voting SNP is make your vote count. Scotland voted to remain.
Yep.
We could be staring at a no-deal Brexit.
Yep.
You know, whenever.
Yeah.
Maybe not at the end of October, but maybe
at some point.
I mean, the truth is that's straight into your argument, isn't it?
What, that Scotland would have to deal with no deal?
Or that the people of Scotland should vote for independence.
Oh yeah, I mean, for me, yes, it is an argument, because
you know, because SNP politicians are very shy about saying no, you know, about this whole question of no deal being good for, you know, for the independence movement.
I see what you mean. Yeah.
Because obviously you don't want to exploit it, or there should be seen to be exploiting it.
But purely on paper.
But the truth is, it is good for the independence cause, isn't it?
No, on paper, it is a classic example, and an undeniable example of they ignore what you want regularly, and so why are you okay with this. I would be surprised if support for independence didn't go up in the event of a no deal.
And so what do you think the timeline is now to independence?
Like most things, it's dependent a lot on what happens down here. Because the politics is changing constantly, it's difficult to tell, but there's going to be another referendum. It's just a matter of when, and it's going to be before the next Scottish Parliament election term. So that'll be, 2021, 22? There's been that many elections. I can't keep count anymore.
So soon?
Aye, soon. Oh, aye, definitely soon.
And is there any doubt in your mind that next referendum will be won, from your point of view?
Yes, because nothing's ever certain. Put it this way, I think it should be ours to lose. Because I think we will never get a clearer example of, like I say, how Scotland is an afterthought for this place, but also finding politically our opponents being in such a weak, divided position.
Culturally, in terms of your identity, have you grown up feeling different to English people?
Some English people, because like that, I would have much more in common with somebody from Liverpool or Manchester than I would from probably somebody from Shetland. I don't think it's down to a nationality thing, it's more either down to, cultural differences in the sense of, we're quite happy having a KFC for dinner, whereas somebody else has got, oh no, I won't be seen dead in there. I suppose it's more of a class sense rather than a
So you don't think culturally, you don't make the case culturally for Scotland being a separate country?
I don't buy it. Oh no, for Scotland being a separate country? Oh God, aye.
So what is the cultural difference?
Well, historically, Scotland is a nation. I don't think anybody would refute that. So Scotland is a country. I think it has a lot more sort of a Celtic history. In terms of its politics, as a solid sort of place, I feel it's more often than not it's been to the left of the rest of the UK. But in reality, Scotland has a lot of Tories in it, a lot of right-wing thinkers, so I wouldn't kid myself on that. But if you look at election results and things, I think there's a case to say that certainly politically, Scotland's been on a different trajectory than the rest of the UK for quite some time. But I don't think that difference is, because Scottish people have different blood or, nothing like that whatsoever. There's 1,001 factors that make up, someone's political beliefs.
I mean, you mentioned Scottish Conservatives. What do you think of the Ruth Davidson decision to leave?
I think even she discovered that there was something that could embarrass her, and that's why she's jumped ship, just because she can't be associated with the absolute rogues that are running the place now. But also this is just me being judgy, but I think that's what you choose to resign over. It's not because, you cut money for disabled people. It's not because you've plunged how many families into poverty. None of that. No, it's because you don't like Boris. Cool.
And what about Conservatives here? Because I vaguely remember an interview you did ages ago when you first came in, talking about, how you quite liked Jacob Rees-Mogg because you thought he was very polite and all the rest of it. I mean, do you still think that? Oh,
I still possibly the most mannerly person I've met, but he's also undoubtedly one of the most dangerous people I've ever met, because it's often a tactic more than anything, in that how could you possibly be angry at me? I'm only ever mannerly. Well, I'm angry at you because you've just said that a woman shouldn't have the right to choose, and yet you've been making a fortune off of abortion pills. Do you not think there's something hypocritical there? But at least it's still a conversation, if you get what I mean. And also, there's a part of me where I think the likes of the Jacob Rees-Moggs of the world, I could actually have more patience with, in the sense that I recognise he comes from a different world than me. His world has been totally different, and in some ways, who could blame him for having a warped view of society, or being ignorant to the plight of the normal person.
Do you think he is?
No, I think too many folk have pointed out to it now. But I've no doubt that initially, yes, there's a lot of ignorance. But I think fundamentally for people like him, though, it boils down to selfishness. I mean, that's what my issue is with the Conservatives, is that when you can argue all the theory, you can argue all the different, points, but ultimately for me it really boils down to that there's just a selfishness there with most Conservatives, and why am I responsible for that?
So you weren't charmed by him? I mean,
no.
I mean, it's not that you changed your opinion of him.
Oh God, no,
over time.
Like I remember,
you always knew that you fundamentally disliked what he stood for.
The poison that comes out that man's mouth is unbelievable. It belongs in the 18th century, but it's things like, I'll be walking through a corridor and what was it he said to me? This was a couple of years ago, and he says, "Yes, how are you finding it?" I was like, "I can't stand it, to be honest with you." And sort of chatting away, and he says, "Yes, you're trying desperately to blow away the cobwebs while I'm trying to put them all back up." Right? And I thought, that's actually all right, patter, So you can have a conversation there in a human level, but he's like an evil genius almost, except missing more genius and more evil. I suppose.
How have you seen what he's done since becoming Leader of the House?
It's laughable, and then you realise this isn't funny. This is...
Because, he's one of the first people who raised prorogation as a technique to deliver Brexit, and they've done that.
Mm-hmm. But this is also where I have problems with this place, though, with Westminster, because it doesn't have a rule book. It means that you can pretty much get away with almost anything. Under the guise of parliamentary procedure, but ultimately, if you're in the opposition, you can't change a bloody thing because they've got the numbers and you don't, and that's as simple as it is.
So what is the point, then, of being an SNP Member of Parliament?
Trying to shine a light on this fact is truly what I see my job as being, is to point out...
Do you struggle with it at all? Do you struggle with what you're really here for? Given you can't change people's lives beyond being a constituency
struggling
MP.
In the sense that, I'm constantly being forced to leave my loved ones, come down here, for half the week. Sometimes you don't know when you're getting home. To never leave this building.
To never be able to change the law.
To never do anything. Because I always worry that it comes across as, just a petulant dislike, and, I never want to be part of that club, and, well, you're right, what is the point then? Well, for me, the point is, in going, look, I'm on the inside, I'm telling you, they do nothing. I'm telling you that this isn't a real function in Parliament. This is a boys' club that masquerades as a Parliament. And it masquerades as one because it has no rules, it has no mechanisms for which to actually take back control, to use a phrase.
How could you make it a functioning place?
For a start, I would move it out of Westminster. I would be interested in having the parliaments that move around the country. I think that's a really interesting idea, but if that's not a feasible one, I think there should be a new parliament built somewhere further north, more in the middle. I think I would get rid of first past the post. I would have proportional representation. I would drastically shake up the committees and how much power committees actually have.
In what way?
In the sense that I believe that committees, if there's argument enough, when they make their recommendations to government, I think government should have to come back with a concrete reason, whether it's economic or whatever, as to why they're not implementing every single recommendation. I would change the working hours as well. I think that would really need looked at. The fact that you've got kids running about here at 9 o'clock at night, being dragged through lobbies because there's nobody else to watch the weigh-ins. And I'd close the pubs as well.
You make it sound like a really unhealthy place.
It is.
It must be a place that's very bad for people's mental health.
Yes, completely. What other workplace are you constantly having to look out and make sure nobody's going to stab you in the back, almost?
Do you even have to think that?
Oh,
as an SNP MP, who's going to stab you in the back?
Well, when we first came down, the abuse was visceral from some of the MPs. And it was actually to my surprise, it was from Labour MPs rather than Tory MPs. The Tory MPs were nothing short of polite and
delighted to see you, I'd imagine, compared to Labour MPs.
But the Labour MPs, I mean, I was in here about maybe 3 hours before I got told to F off by one of the Labour.
MP?
Aye, it was visceral when we first came down, and like that, once the drink starts flowing, as I say, people often let their masks slip.
I mean, because to other young people listening to this, thinking about politics, I mean, you're not really selling it.
I know. I know. Every time I talk about the place, I'm like, what are you doing? Go and get a normal job. But, yeah, no.
So you would struggle, would you, to say, yes, come into politics is a great thing?
Well, no, I would say come into politics, but know what you're coming into. I know that in my head, I'm still a normal person, if that makes sense. So because I view this place as a normal person, I need more folk like that to come in and make me feel less mad. Because sometimes I feel, especially in Westminster, am I the only one seeing this? I mean, we shout like barn animals daily to make our opinions known. What is that all about? You know, some of the bad manners you see in the chamber you wouldn't find in your own living room, never mind, you know, in your workplace.
I mean, in terms of the types of people who go into politics, I mean, one of the funny byproducts of the 2015 intake was that the SNP turned out to be the gayest parliamentary group in history.
Yep.
Why do you think that was?
We're just fabulous. That's the honest answer.
Do you think there is a relationship between people that have to kind of fight for their identity and people who go into politics?
I think there could be a connotation between more the progressive side of things, because the SNP in Scotland were, once they started becoming more than just a small rebellious party on the fringes, once it, like 2007 started having more of an appearance, and then obviously 2011 was, you know, a majority. I think people saw for the first time something different actually happening, because before that all we'd had was Thatcher, and then Tony Blair became Thatcher 2.0, and then it was a Labour Lib Dem coalition, so it was all still very much in the same vein. But then suddenly you had SNP come in and go, no, we're actually going to do practical things that you will notice. And I think the 2007 programme for government was probably the best that we've ever done, because it did deliver so many simple but, you know, noticeable things. And that in itself, I think, spurred a lot of people to go, oh, maybe this isn't a waste of time, and to actually get involved. And when you've got a progressive force starting to grow, you know, in politics, it's inevitable that you'll get progressives as such joining it. But for me, what was most noticeable about the 2015 group was that the majority of us had never been politicians. And that's what I really liked about it, was I'm sitting in a room with, you know, a former First Minister, with, you know, folk who've been elected for 16 years, but I'm also sitting beside a teacher. I'm also sitting beside a guy that works with cameras. I'm also sitting beside a hairdresser, and I used to fry chips. So it's a fair mix, you know, which I think was part of what made our group really healthy, especially in 2015, in terms of internal debate and things like that, because we did have so many different viewpoints that by the time we would take an idea into the public, we'd already poked all the holes in it, in a sense.
But you've made LGBTQ plus, and trans issues in particular, something that you speak about a lot. How are you able to, how do you view your own, or how do you balance your own privacy within that? And what you're prepared to be public about, what you're prepared to, or what you want to keep for you?
Everything that's in my private life is private until, it's got to be something pretty big for me to go, do you know what, it's worth me giving up that snippet. Because when I was elected, particularly when I came to London, it was just media warmth. You know, you would have thought I was the next celebrity or something. It was unbelievable, the attention that was put on me, and I hated it. I absolutely hated it, because I'm here to do a job. I'm not here to be a source of entertainment for the Daily Mail, you know, because I got chips for my lunch. So that for me, I very immediately went, right, Bomb, you're getting nothing from me unless it's about politics. And that took a long time to build up, you know, a lot of very heated conversations with editors and things like that. But because of that, it's allowed me the space to choose when to, you know, give away a wee snippet about my private life.
I mean, you talked about the abuse you've had. I mean, you called it a boys' club.
Yep.
Have you had any sexual harassment or anything like that? Yeah.
Not here, I don't think, because I don't let anybody close enough for a start. But no, like I felt the discomfort of, particularly in the voting lobbies, when you've got folk who have been accused by 3 women of whatever else, and they're pressed right up against you, and everybody's squashed. You just think, this isn't normal.
Why are they pressed up against you? Just explain that.
Because the lobbies are so small. Like, it sounds mad when you say it, but the chamber in the House of Commons is not big enough for all the MPs in it. And after the Second World War, when it was bombed, an architect came along and he says, yeah, if we could make the chamber bigger. And I believe it was Churchill said, no, it's part of the theatrics, is keeping it small. So you've got a chamber that can't even fit all the politicians in it, and then you ask them to vote in the most archaic way of all getting into this one corridor where they get 8 minutes to get their foot in the corridor, and then the doors are locked and you have to exit one by one with doors pointed at 45 degrees. Bearing in mind, these are doors designed for people in, 1800s. Folk have got a lot wider since then.
So you're literally crammed in.
Oh my God, it's unbelievable.
Well, surrounded by men, I guess.
Well, yeah, men, but yes, and you just think this is not okay at all. And when you have people who have been sexually assaulted or harassed in that same situation, well, that's uncomfortable. Like, that makes me uncomfortable. And if Parliament can't even, get itself together enough to deal with an issue like that, why the hell do we expect anywhere else or any other workplace to actually deal with it effectively? So I think this place is hypocritical as sin. I'm really selling it.
Yeah. So I mean, you've talked a lot about what things you would change. Yeah. I mean, if I ask you to sort of concentrate on what's the thing you would really change if you could change the world?
I would want people to be more understanding of each other and patient. Because I think that's what's fundamentally missing from pretty much every democracy in the world. But for me, that's the only way that democracy actually thrives, is if you do have the patience to keep trying to convert people to realising that you've got facts telling you this, and this. Do you not want to at least try doing this a bit differently? And I suppose to be understanding in the sense of you need to understand where someone else is coming from in order to build a bridge with them. And if you can't even get those two down, then how the hell you think you're going to change anything is...
And do you think democracy is under threat?
Oh, aye. We're about to shut down Parliament tonight, so yes, democracy is undoubtedly under threat, undoubtedly. Not just in terms of our institutions, but in terms of our education around democracy, or lack of political education, more to speak.
But is it under threat in the sense that, our representative democracy will just sort of be so out of touch with people that it doesn't matter? Or is it more sinister than that?
No, it's more sinister. You look at history, right? The Nazis. Hitler was voted into power. The Nazis didn't, come in and leather boots, kick down the doors and go, right, we're in charge. It didn't happen like that. It was a drip effect where it's just, we're going to push it a wee bit more, and then a wee bit more, and then a wee bit more, and then what do you know, you've not got a parliament anymore, I'm just in charge. So I can never remember who the quote is from, but it was somebody who said fascism doesn't come in, you know, exactly like that, boots kicking through doors and sashes already on. It comes in creepily, it creeps its way through. It comes in with a promise that you'll get your country back. It's a promise that you'll get a well-paid job. It's a promise that your country will be able to stand on its own 2 feet.
And you really think that's happening? Because obviously this is something that's talked about a lot, and particularly the Boris Johnson supporters say, how can you compare what we're doing to that? You know, Boris Johnson, fundamentally liberal, a man who talked about immigration, writing off all the sort of illegal immigration, a man who's basically a one-nation Tory, and yet you're comparing what's going on there to fascism.
Yes. Oh God, yes. Because to say that Boris Johnson believes in anything, I think is as dishonest as Boris Johnson is, because I don't believe that man has a principled bone in his body. He goes with whatever serves his self-interest. In fact, was it not him that had 2 letters written to go out, one supporting Brexit and the other one against it, and then at the last minute decided to go along with Brexit? He will flip-flop on absolutely anything to suit his agenda. So he's now in charge, which at one point was unthinkable. Dominic Cummings is his advisor, who has been held in contempt of Parliament, and yet is now sitting on the shoulder of the guy who's in charge of Parliament. That's a bit sugary. We have them attempting to subvert the law, to subvert being accountable in any shape or form, to the point that they're prepared to actually close Parliament to serve their agenda. I mean, if that is not raising alarm bells, then what do they need to do for you to start feeling alarmed? And the idea that he's a one-nation Tory, this is a guy who talks about watermelon smiles and letterboxes. He's not one nation at all. He's Boris Nation. That's all he's interested in. And I think a lot of people will get a real fright, either when no deal happens, or they'll get a fright in terms of what this government's prepared to do to get what it wants. And you're already seeing it in America with Trump, where he's got children in cages. Like, I don't know how else to describe what he's got, or what he's built at the borders. There's children in cages, so are we okay with that? Is that not something that should really be raising alarm bells? And now we've got a Prime Minister who wants to be best pals with this guy, and who wants to sell off our NHS, who wants to sell off all...
Well, he says he doesn't.
He says he doesn't, but he also said that he was a one-nation Tory. You know, as if you can trust anything that comes out of that guy's mouth. So
what do you really fear going on here?
What I fear is that we end up in a situation where disinformation is so powerful that it's back to just basically propaganda.
I mean, people might say, oh, politicians have always lied to us, or or sort of not really told the truth. Is there something different about
Yes, because at least when politicians, I think 15, 20 years ago, the kind of lies that they would tell to the public were more half-truths than anything else. Or it was, saying something but missing out a certain caveat to it, or wording something to make it sound more positive than it is. So it was always it was spin more than anything. But now we're in an age where it's just point blank lying. I mean, to the fact that you can be flung out of that chamber for calling someone a liar, but you can't get flung out for actually standing up and telling a lie. How's that a accountable democracy? So when you're now at a point where a campaign based on lies has managed to win, and somehow that's the democratic mandate, is just very backwards for me. And I think we've got I think Boris Johnson is the unfortunate reflection of what Britain's turned into at this minute in time. Same way as Trump's a reflection of what America's turned into.
Just as a slight aside, I mean, you raised Trump. In your ideal world, how would Scotland treat Trump?
My ideal world would be we've got nothing to do with you until, for starters, let all those kids out those cages, let all those people out those cages, let's get a few things straight here. This sort of language, not okay. If that is truly what your policy is, cool, we don't want anything to do with you. Simple as.
This is a man who invests in Scotland.
I'm pretty sure somebody else will be able to invest in, and Scotland would much rather somebody else's money than his. And that's the thing, is even his golf course Scotland didn't want. It was hoisted upon the folk in Aberdeen. So, yeah, I've got no fear. I think fundamentally, as a society, so as a country, there has to be a point where you draw a line and you go, no, this is what our standard is. So
in an ideal world, for example, would you like to see Scotland... I mean, there's a news story at the moment around the use of Scottish airports, Prestwick, by American military. Would you like to see the Scottish government, which owns that airport, saying, no, you can't come?
I would, yeah, definitely. But I also recognise, though, at this moment in time, the reality of dealing with the consequences of that. They don't have the level of control that they would need to make that a real effective statement.
Because they don't have foreign policy.
Yep. So that's, again, when it comes back to independence for me, it gives us the freedom to make our own mind up. What I would love is to see the United Kingdom government going, we want nothing to do with this. This guy's out of control. But as we've seen, money talks, and I don't want to live in a society where the only thing that talks is money, and the only thing that gets politicians' attention is money. So, yeah, I think we're holding hands with America as we skip down a very, very dangerous path.
Mhairi Black, thank you very much indeed for sharing your ways to change the world. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, then please do give us a rating.